Or do you see a value in that? Is my first question.
All right, I don't know, Brian Spence?
I would start by suggesting that that capability exists to some degree today. Maybe not to the ultimate degree of a separate tree for every customer, but certainly it's really a matter of how complex you want your algorithm to be when you implement, in terms of the number of different categories of customer you want and how you recognize the inbound number and determine which tree that customer goes down. So you could have many customers calling the same number, dialing the same number, but recognizing their inbound ID and therefore categorizing them. And most implementations probably don't do that. Most implementations probably give everybody the same choices. But you could relatively easily pause at the moment of they hit the IVR and implement based on two different categories, 5 different categories, 20 different categories, what the implementation is going to be. So I would say that that capability exists to the extent you're willing to bring that complexity into your system. Now, once you do that, it makes more permutations to test every time you make a change, and so there's a balance there between how many different categories, and ultimately you could have a different tree for every customer, but that would probably be too burdensome, right?
What we see here is, a lot of times, customers who are used to IVR, they cut through. That means they over-dial. For example, as soon as they get the welcome message, they immediately press 212 or 223, whatever, so that they can go to their own menu. Right? There are customers doing that. I do not even customers to do that. If he is very clear about it, or he had been doing that, he has that history, why don't he can get that?
I do business with an airline in the U.S., and they have a particularly frustrating IVR implementation. And I can't hit the 0 fast enough when I get through 0, 0, 0, because I'm trying to get out of the IVR to an agent, because I know that I'm going to get very far in the process before it's going to kick me out because it heard me wrong or whatever. So it's one of those voice activated, and it's just not a very good implementation. And I'm typically on the move in a loud place, and maybe my accent is not in tune with that particular IVR. But so I can relate to those customers that just want to get out. But I think, and I'll let Spence comment more from a direction standpoint, but I think the answer to your fundamental question is that there's a great capability to tailor it that just has to be balanced with the operational complexity that you can tolerate in your own organization. And the more expertise you have in-house to manage that, probably the more flexibility you can tolerate. You don't want to, if you're overly reliant on external parties every time you want to make a change, then you probably want to keep it more consistent.
Yeah, I think though once you know the mobile number of the person calling, certain customizations, I mean, I don't have to tell every time press 1 for English, because if I've called 5 times, I've always done English.
That is what is possible, and we've done that.
Yeah, I think.
You can record your language preferences.
Yeah, or even if you don't specifically do so, it should automatically figure out that
Once you selected one, then
Yeah.
for example, that is a capability, and which we have also done, is that once you come in and first time I prompt you what language you want to select. Once you said English, then
it's always going to be English.
No, it is beyond that, actually. See,
And
it
that's
is
not
not
a
default
no, it should
language,
be much
actually.
beyond. If I only call for, I don't know, credit card balances, or if I only call for give me a checkbook, then it should have that, that last time you called for this, is that what you want? Or usually call for A, B, or normally your top 3 reasons for calling us are A, B, C. If it's these, please tell, or if not, then, because normally you don't call them, there are of course a few customers who call for everything, but normally, but there are usually people who call for 2 or 3 things, and that is, I mean, I'm not the person
Those
programming this, but
customers give us a lot of learnings. The
Yeah.
customers who call for everything would give us a lot of
we'll
learnings.
test the system to the limit.
Correct.
But yeah, there's some value. But people are used to getting better and better, for example, phones and touch screens and things being very intuitive. So this IVR is actually itself a little primitive product if you think about it, because it's from that era when we used to have touch pads and dial pads. It's not the same anymore, right? I mean, ideally when I call, and if it's a smartphone, my screen should just show options. And why is it a voice at the other end, right? I should just be able to call and it should launch an app or something. And from there only I can go. I think that is somewhere the future, because why should I always, if I have a phone which can display things, then why am I calling and why is it a pure voice call? I don't know. I mean, I'm not in that
For
field.
voice calls, I mean, definitely what everyone said today is true. The capability is there for building fixed trees with a myriad of possible rules for routing. But the interesting answer to your question would really incorporate the big data solutions that are coming in the near term with real-time analytics. So we're working with Microsoft with technologies like HD Insight and Stream Insights that will recognize what you're calling about, and based on your prior calls and how recent those calls are, would route you appropriately within the organization. And that's just one example. There's other examples of what other non-structured data in the enterprise you could use to route those calls. But it becomes much less of a fixed tree and much more of an routing based on insight at the moment, real time.
So, for instance, is there an active claim in the insurance company? Is there a flight scheduled for this flyer within the next 6 hours? When they call, the first thing we want to say is, are you calling about your claim? Are you calling about your flight? You know, as opposed to taking them to the traditional tree. These are easy things to do today with the technology.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, and this can get irritating also, like the Google suggest. It just, will you please listen to me, kind of. And I agree, but I'm just saying, when I call, why is it a tree? Why can't it just say, okay, you've called, on your phone, see the picture we are displaying. Pick from one of those options. I mean, why is there a tree? It's so old-fashioned to have these numbers and punching. It should show on my screen my account and whatever are the issues, and press either of these things. I mean, it has to be multimedia. I don't know how much this voice and this thing will work, because if people have smartphones, you're not using the enormous power of that phone to connect and show all the information right there, and then say, okay, pick this.
And this is where I think Skype will join with Link, for instance, and there'll be so many different places from a given website to reach into the contact center, and they'll know exactly where you were, as opposed to just going back out to the home screen and engaging with the icon there. So that's exactly what we expect.
So specifically on this, if I just think a little more technically, whatever I can think of is that two ways of doing it, but again there are operator dependencies today. For example, can you establish a USSD session on the customer's phone while the call? So maybe, but it has to be customer has to initiate it. Then you can just get the screen, whether it is a smartphone or non-smartphone, you can get a USSD session. Second thing is that yes, if the app is there and the smartphone carries that app, can that app, based on the number dialed, automatically get launched? And then once once the connection is there, then you can actually do it rather than beeping on that. So actually, rather than saying 1, 2, 3, you can, the buttons can be saying balance inquiry, checkbook request, and you can just ATM. Yeah, like you can avoid actually the voice outs. 1 for this, 2 for 3. Just you have the key and you press that. And so I believe these things are doable, very much doable. Doesn't need major technology investment. It's more about little innovation, and they can be done. And what you said is very much doable through this. I would say a preferences database. So if I know that 60% of the time you've always gone to request for checkbook, then rather than having multiple IVR trees, can I directly put you onto that option automatically? So
actually, my question is, I know it is doable, definitely, when we are thinking, it is the imagination. But I was asking Aspect team, more so from the perspective of bringing in that value as a differentiator from Aspect as a solution provider.
I would say that
where I was.
I would say at. Rather than product coming out with the innovation and everybody having that, it is about that innovator to do it with them and then say, here it is.
I would say that certainly most IVR products, for instance, all of what we've just described here, no matter which IVR product we were describing, much of that same capability exists. Where you start to get some differentiation, for instance, is in the professional services and the skill and experience in harnessing it that way. For instance, we talked about our professional services practice tied to Microsoft and the app development, mobile app development that they're doing, and the ability to mirror that application with another user experience that might already exist. For instance, last week I was at a bank in the United Kingdom, and they're in their proof of concept phase where they basically have the app mirror the ATM screen. Every touch, every aspect of it is the same. So when you're on their mobile banking app, you literally can go into ATM mode. Now, I don't know if they figured out yet how to get the cash to come out of the phone, but they're working on that next, and there's some legalities there. But this is the idea: is a consistent user interface and to harness the technology in the customer's hands.
Thanks. It seems.
Innovation on this, which I've seen in Windows, is that again of a cardless withdrawal from an ATM using a smart app. So the cameras being there, what this ATM can only display the barcode. So you just point your camera onto the barcode and read it, and that initiates session on the mobile phone authentication. And because of that barcode, you know which ATM to display the money gets dispensed. So I would say the possibilities are unlimited in today's time. It is about joining those dots together and making a unique proposition.
I think some of you guys have to take that bold step and say, we're going to this. And then these guys will go for it.
I think it's unlimited because it's about the permutation and combination. So you have marbles of different colors and sizes. You just join them together and it becomes a new product proposition. But yes, it should be something which it's not your own fulfillment, but what the customer is going to appreciate.
Yeah, and I think going back to Chetan's changing the game, you could be first, and I heard Spence says if somebody wants to pilot something, we could talk to you about that, right? So a lot of interest in this discussion, maybe switching gears and taking another question. Anyone else in the floor? I think quite a few hands. So,
Since this is about challenges towards customer experiences, 3 challenges which I thought come to my mind right now is which typically go about not be a option today. The second thing is I believe if you have to be truly customer centric, you need to anticipate your customer needs rather than him calling you. You should have ways to get in touch with the customer before he needs. If he has placed a call, then you'll need to call him and update him on the status of the call. If he wants to, a bank statement is calling to find an account, probably an SMS to him would probably help. Now this can all happen if your analytics layer over whatever transactions are happening on the contact center processes are managed well. And the third challenge which I see is the integration. Today, unless the rest of the organization is integrated with your frontline contact center, both in terms of technology, in terms of processes, I guess you will not be able to deliver the true moments of truth to the customer, those delightful experiences which one can actually deliver to the customer. So I want to have your comments on these 3 aspects. One is the regulation, the second is the proactive analytics bit, and the third is the integration bit.
all right, maybe we defer the analytics and integration to Spence.
I didn't really follow the question that well, but I believe that there are some hardware solutions out there to address the specific Indian regulation about separation of wired calls and VoIP. So I think there are some options out there in India to support some of these scenarios. But in terms of big data in general and real-time analytics, I don't see that really as a limitation. There's a lot you can do within each of the individual channels leveraging these technologies based on keywords that are in texts, based on who the information is coming from, based on telephone numbers if you're calling in. I'm not sure if that addresses the question, but...
Regarding the integration of the rest of the enterprise, this is an important point. I have a customer who I've worked with for quite some time, but even before I was with Aspect, and he is a large telecom contact center owner, and he's got 30, maybe 50,000 seats now, and his vision, or the way he frames it so the rest of his organization can understand frequently is he says, we have 100,000 information workers in the company, and we need to treat them all as agents. They all need to have a seat. And so he does this mostly to talk about the price per seat and why it should be lower.